Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for coming this afternoon. My name's Suzanne DiBianca, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Salesforce, and have the privilege of moderating today's panel. So just by way of introduction, we are very committed to sort of multi-stakeholder approach that the World Economic Forum is so famous for. And we have with us today a range of experts in the area of forestry and have done incredible work in their communities and in their countries in this area. So what I'll just say, because I really want to hear sort of directly from the panelists, but I'll just do a real quick sort of two-sentence introduction on who's here. To my left, we have Felix Finkbeiner, who's from Germany. Started an organization called Plant for the Planet when he was 9 years old. He was a youth activist, youth climate activist before it was a movement. You're now 22 and has been at planting trees since he was 9 and has seen the planting of about 16 billion since then. So welcome. To his left, Dr. Jane Goodall, UN Ambassador of Peace, really needs no introduction. Has been an incredible privilege for me to work with her over the past number of years, and we've learned so much about what's required, particularly with local communities, as we move forward with this Trillion Tree program, which we've launched here this year at Davos. To her left, we have Carlos Rodríguez, Minister of the Environment for Costa Rica, really the gold standard of how countries are approaching this issue. And we'll hear from him a little bit about how he's handled it and what he's learned, especially from an economic development perspective. And finally, at the very end of the row is Tom Crowther, incredible scientist and researcher out of just a few miles down the road out of Zurich at EHD, and has done really incredible work with mapping and using artificial intelligence to tell us where these trees can be planted at scale. So Felix, I'll start with you. You have been at this for a long time. What have you learned in terms of what it takes to sort of galvanize a movement, first of all? And then secondly, what do you think about the youth climate movement of today?
Well, actually, I think the story of how the Trillion Tree campaign became a thing now is maybe a great story to illustrate what I've learned about this all. We started calling on the world to plant 1 trillion trees in 2011 because we heard some internal calculations from our friends at the World Resource Institute that around 1 trillion trees could be restored around the world. So since then, originally at a speech at the UN back then, we've been trying to convince the world to plant 1 trillion trees. But of course, we were, a couple of crazy kids out of Germany mainly and some other countries talking about this, and no one truly took us serious about this. Of course, we were trying to plant as many trees as well at that time. But then we met Tom, who with his fantastic lab and research colleagues then put out a series of great papers that have shown the world the true value of global reforestation, and that around 1 trillion trees is possible. And then, of course, it has now become one of the most cited, I think the most cited climate paper in 2019, and it's meant that Mark heard about it, and a lot of other very influential voices heard about it. So we're incredibly excited that 9 years after we first tried convincing the world to plant 1 trillion trees, this I think is truly starting now. So that's absolutely fantastic. And that was obviously not the only reason this past year was exciting, but particularly because the other big part of Plant for the Planet youth activism has also had a fantastic year this past year all around the world. And I'm so deeply grateful and so awe-inspired by Greta and all her colleagues all around the world for making this happen.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you've been, I think, an incredible inspiration also for them. And we have Alexander, if you don't mind just raising your hand, I won't make you say anything, has founded an organization in the United States called Earth Uprising and has organized all the climate marches in the US and has been a privilege to work with her and her father. So thank you also for being here. Carlos, I'll sort of turn to you next. We've heard about what's required from governments around the world. Some are acting in more powerful ways than others, and Costa Rica as a real leader, and your leadership in sort of becoming the gold standard for how to do this. What do you think the role of government is as we think about what needs to happen at scale?
Thank you. Thank you all. And probably I will begin with the most important statement that I can do this afternoon, which is, yes, we need to restore forests, but please don't forget the oceans. We need to address in the same effort, because it's not that different, with the same commitment, with the same passion, and the same energy, the whole planet. We normally leave aside for the next step or for the next generation, the ocean. Don't forget that. That is probably the biggest, most important statement that I can do today. I grew up as a conservationist, dedicated all my life to preserve life in this planet, particularly in my country, in the tropics. Unfortunately, my kids won't follow my career because, as far as I see, they will dedicate themselves to become ecological restorators, because what my generation did. So when I have these late night dinners with my kids, I got 4 kids. One now she's living in the UK, but 4 kids. I got 4 nasty, serious Gretas in my dinner table every evening, asking questions. I'm the Minister of Environment, and they think that I can, with a magic stick, can change things. And they make hard questions, very hard questions, and I've been able to, perceive a lot of things. And one of the most important elements that I try to explain to them that they don't get it is the fact, this is my 3rd time as Minister of Environment of Costa Rica. And through my career in politics, I have come to realize that one of the most challenging things that we need to address right now from the policy government perspective is that countries, governments, and head of states still appoint ministers of environment that doesn't know nothing about environment. Nothing about environment. I see them in the north, I see them in the south, I see them in the UN meetings. That is incredible and extremely important, because I never see governments trying not to put the best economists in the finance agency and the best farmer or cowboy in the agriculture and the Ministry of Agriculture. We still don't get it. And we don't understand that we don't only need an expert on conservation and environment, we need an expert on sustainable development and a guy who really knows how to network and provide information into the higher decision-making process. That is one very important element. So why people recognize Costa Rica as different? Well, basically, we've been able to go from being the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere when my grandfather was born in 1906 to be one of the top 3 societies in the Western Hemisphere in terms of human development. Costa Rica lives longer and happier with a smaller footprint than any American. So that's a big leap forward. And in that context, we were able to really understand the role that nature provides and plays in our human development. Costa Rica was able to stop deforestation, double the size of our forest, while we triple our economy in the last 30 years. At the same time, we went totally 100% renewable in the electric sector. We did it while the economy tripled, and we did it with our own resources. Of course, bilateral, multilateral, the NGOs played a big role, but the decision on how to mobilize resources was taken by the governments. So the bottom line is we can restore the environment, we can protect nature, that won't become a burden for development and growth. So we feel that we are kind of, we play in the Premier League of ecological restoration because we have been able to restore 30% of the country. And if we want to restore the land of the planet, and remember the ocean is there, if we want to restore the land and forest of this planet, Costa Rica has some good ideas on how to do it, generating jobs in a very inexpensive manner. And the best way we learned how to do it was to really understand how nature works. We just understood by putting science and scientists behind it, and we understood what we need to do to help nature restore herself. Using nature is cost efficient in the restoration. But at the same time, we put a tax on carbon, 1997. The revenues of the carbon tax goes to a forest fund that does payments to small farmers and indigenous communities to keep their forests and to restore the landscape by paying them a price that is higher than the cost of opportunity of doing cattle ranching, and 20 years later, you got a lot of forests. So I think that we have a set of good examples on how to restore landscapes, position nature in the core of economic growth, and began, shifting towards a society that strongly believes in different principles, values, and different philosophies. So I think that, really understanding the market failure and dealing with that, and the restoration can be done very, very efficiently. So reforestation and restoration is the discussion. Reforestation is kind of a very northern concept. Let's tropicalize it. If you're going to do this effort, don't concentrate just in the northern countries. There's a lot that you can do in the tropics by using nature, and by using nature, you will be helping humans that lives in those forests, in those natural ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think your point on conservation, reforestation, critical to this conversation. Something that, Felix, I learned from you when you were telling, and we were talking about the 15, 16 billion trees that were planted over the last 11 years, and you said, well, just as many have been destroyed. That's right, much more, right? A football field every second. And this is also very important to the World Economic Forum and the 1 Trillion Tree Initiative. So I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Justin and Florian from WEF. Where are you? Yeah, thank you, who are running the 1 Trillion Tree Initiative and have been really ensuring that it is holistic in nature. And so with that, and Jane, I'm going to come to you last because I know you also have to leave a little early before we open it to Q&A. But before we sort of come back to the notion of both conservation, restoration, and new planting, Tom, I'd love to hear from you about the science behind it all. So you've been doing some great work with mapping. Can you kind of give us some statistics and what you've learned and where you think we should be focused?
All right, well, thanks. So yeah, simply put, our science is showing that across the world's degraded ecosystems, these are ecosystems that would naturally be flourishing ecosystems, and across those lands, there's room for about 1 trillion trees, or slightly over 1 trillion trees, that would have an incredible power for carbon drawdown, in the order of 100 to 200 gigatons of carbon once those trees reach full maturity. So this, it's been incredibly exciting to see the explosion of interest, including all of this that's happened since that research has come out, because it is an incredibly powerful tool in our arsenal against climate change. But it's also worth noting that it's also, with anything this powerful, comes some really big threats and really big dangers if we get it wrong. So the first is very simply that this cannot preclude cutting emissions. Any climate change solution has to fundamentally involve cutting emissions. There's not room on the entire planet to offset all of our emissions with trees. This is not offsetting emissions. This is an additional component. We need to offset reduce our emissions and draw down carbon. The second challenge is getting ecologically right, because in many places around the world, if you just blanket trees over the place, you'll destroy biodiversity. Or you can have a warming impact where you'll increase reduce the surface albedo in very high latitude regions of the planet. So figuring out which regions to restore and what the density of trees and which types of trees to restore is absolutely critical. And we have the science to do that right in any region around the world now. So we're hoping, and we know that the Trillion Tree campaign will be based on that best available science to say what tree goes where. And the third, probably the biggest challenge, is the social one. Because too many times restoration projects come and they buy up a chunk of land and they'll exclude the local community from that land. And not only is that socially irresponsible, but it's also unsustainable because that community comes down and they'll use that land for their livelihoods, understandably. But when restoration is done through that community, the chances of success spike enormously. When the funding is channeled towards that community and they benefit from all the ecosystem services those ecosystems provide, then is when you see the true sustainable impact of restoration, where agricultural systems are enhanced by the value of having trees in those ecosystems, trapping water and providing soil nutrients. So when we get it right, if we do it socially and ecologically responsibly, we do have an incredibly powerful tool at our disposal. And it's so exciting to see everyone engaging, because this isn't just one for the governments or for the industry, but it's one for every single one of us to get engaged in.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Tom. And, yeah, here. As we've been learning about this in partnership with WEF and getting coached by incredible people like you have really mentored all of us sort of through this, there's been a few themes that have come out. One is there is a lot of organizations doing great work in this area that we need to learn from, and that frankly we need to lift up and help sort of put the wind in the sails. But there's not enough collaboration, coordination, and funding. So this is going to be a very big part of the initiative that A TrillionTree.org is going to be focused on. And the second theme has been around a real kind of disconnect between the global actors and the local communities. And so it's something else that I think that we're really focused on as we think about what does this initiative need to be and who does it need to include. And Jane, you have been at this for a long time. You have worked with people all over the world, deep commitment to working with young people through Roots and Shoots, and you have inspired all of us, and really with Mark, who has done a lot of work in oceans with Sylvia and incredible leaders, and sort of inspired him to sort of say, well, what about forests and what are we doing in this area? So thank you for your inspiration. And what do you think? What is your take on the Trillion Tree initiative that we're standing up together? And what advice do you have, especially as it relates to local communities and youth?
Okay, well, first of all, I think the Trillion Tree initiative is really exciting. And I was thinking when you were talking, Tom, about the artificial intelligence that's enabled you to map out where the trees should go and the kind of trees that should be put there. We need to combine the artificial intelligence with ordinary human intelligence as well. Yeah. And ordinary human intelligence, the human intellect, has led us in perhaps not very good ways. And as I'm always saying, I will only achieve our true human potential when head and heart work together. So we want head, heart, and the head that's produced the artificial intelligence all combining to make this initiative successful. I think probably you all agree that starting off with that little tiny documentary, it sort of, didn't it give the magic of the forest and the tragedy of the destruction? And I would like to introduce Jeff Horowitz, who really had who made this thing possible. So stand up, Jeff.
Yeah,
because it is
please,
such
Jeff.
a good
Thank
film.
you.
Well, what I love about this initiative is that everybody can get involved. Not just governments, but everybody. Everybody can plant a tree or give money for people in developing countries to plant trees. So I became involved in the actual importance of planting trees when I realized in 1986 how quickly forests were disappearing across Africa, which meant that the chimpanzees whom I was studying were disappearing as well. And that's when I felt that I had to try to do something about it. I flew over some areas in Africa. I visited some areas where chimpanzees live. I learned a great deal about the problems faced by the chimpanzees, but I also learned about the problems faced by the local people, many of whom were living in crippling poverty, who had lack of good health and education facilities, and where the land was degraded as human populations were growing. And when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, which is in Tanzania, it had been part of the great equatorial forest belt, stretching over to the west coast. When I flew over in 1990, then I saw a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. And that's when I realized that if we don't find and help the local people to find ways of making a livelihood without destroying the environment, we can't even try to save the chimpanzees, and the future of these people is doomed. So that's when the Jane Goodall Institute began the Take Care Otakari initiative. And right from the start, it was giving ownership to the local people. It was a group of local Tanzanians who went into the villages around Gombe and asked them what they thought we could do to make their lives better. And it was restoring fertility to the overused soil. It was better health and education facilities. And at the start, we didn't talk to them about the need to conserve the forests for the chimps because they were people struggling to survive. But gradually, as they came to realize what they could do to make their lives better, at the same time, they began to understand the importance of the forest for their own lives, how it was providing clean air and water and shade. And so the idea of agroforestry and growing crops in combination with trees that can put nitrogen into the soil. And today that program in Tanzania is throughout the whole chimpanzee range, 104 villages, and some of the villages are very big. And they're all providing volunteers to become forest monitors. They go into their forest reserves where most chimpanzees live unprotected, and they learn to use smartphones. They're very proud of this. And they chose what they would record on their smartphones jointly, and that goes up to a platform in the clouds, Global Forest Watch. And we started off planting trees. Some of the first things we did was tree nurseries. But we very quickly realized that leave the land alone that has been over-farmed. And the seeds, the magic of the seeds in the soil, and sometimes the roots of trees that were there. And the trees began to come back, which was cheaper for us. If you fly over that whole area today, you won't see bare hills anymore. There's one or two villages that haven't taken part, but by and large, they've all understood the value. They have become our partners in conservation. We have given them the tools whereby they can conserve their land. So with this trillion tree initiative, you know, it's planting trees in many places where the land is so overused that it can't be restored by itself. It needs some help. It's restoring the forest, as we have around Gombe National Park, by letting the forest restore itself, giving it time, and obviously money working with the people. And then it's protecting the rainforests that we have, and the boreal forests. It's not only the rainforests, with their biodiversity, because we're part of this forest ecosystem. We depend on it for clean air and clean water, and we depend on it for many other things. So I think, Tom, you told me that urban planting wasn't part of this trillion tree initiative. I think it should be, because planting trees in our cities is beneficial in many ways. One, those trees too can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but they provide shade. They decrease the temperature of the city by a good deal. And it's been shown that when you start greening a city, crime levels drop. It's more healthy for young people. And of course, the last thing I would say is that all the programs we're doing, this Take Care to Kari program is in 6 other African countries around forests where chimpanzees live. And it costs money, and I began traveling the world and learning what we're doing to the planet, including the destruction of the oceans, which depends on protecting our rivers, from which a huge amount of pollution goes into the ocean. And so that's when I began our youth program, Roots and Shoots, back in 1991, starting with 12 Tanzanian high school students. It's now kindergarten, university, everything in between, in about 60 countries around the world. The main message, every single individual makes a difference every single day. What we do matters. We can choose what to do, at least once we alleviate crippling poverty. When you're really poor, you cut down the last tree because you've got to survive, or you fish the last fish from the ocean because you've got to feed your family. And so alleviating poverty, reducing the unsustainable lifestyle of so many of us. And finally, we must think about human population growth. We can't just ignore it. It's been ignored for too long. And I'm not giving any solutions there, but I can say that where we provided women's education, empowered women, kept girls in school with scholarships, taught local women to go into the villages and talk about family planning. We haven't got quite where we would like to get, but when we began, the average family a woman expected to have was 8 to 10. Now it's down to 3 or 4. So we've made a start. And all of these things come together. This trillion tree plantation idea I love, because every single person can get involved. And I find this technology which can measure each tree. I was reviled by the scientific community for naming chimpanzees. I don't know what's going to be done to me if I start suggesting we name the trees we plant. Then we care for them.
Thank you. Thanks, Jane. Yep.